Dr. Wahls, welcome to the Health Path podcast. It is a genuine honor to connect. I just said that it's been many years that I've wanted to be able to speak with you, having followed your work for a while now.
Well, thank you. Always glad to chat with you.
Yeah, so a lot of our practitioners will be somewhat familiar with your journey and the research that you've been doing, but I'm sure some of our listeners might be new to this. So are you happy to start by just sharing a little bit of your journey?
Yeah, and we'll sort of tell it in real time as it unfolded. So if we go back about 22 years exactly, I'm out walking with my wife. My left leg grows weak, dragging it, I hobble home. The next day I see the neurologist who says, Terry, this could be bad or really, really bad. So at night in bed next to Jackie, I think about really, really bad. What does that mean? And I think about the 20 years of worsening face pains due to trigeminal neuralgia that I've had. And I don't want to become disabled. So I'm secretly praying for a fatal diagnosis. 3 weeks later, I hear multiple sclerosis, see the best people, the best MS center in the country, take the newest drugs. 3 years later, I hear tilt, recline, wheelchair. My face pain is relentlessly worse. Tears stream down my face as my 10-year-old daughter hugs me. But I am a physician. So night after night, I go to PubMed to read the basic science, and I begin experimenting on myself. And the speed of my decline slows. I adopt the paleo diet, but I am still declining. Then I discover a study using electrical stimulation of muscles. I asked my physical therapist, can I try that? He calls it e-stim. He says it's for athletes. Plus, it says it's really painful. And I have so many issues with pain. But he does give me a test session, and it does hurt really, really bad. But when it's over, I feel great. He says it's because of the endorphins. And I begin adding e-stim to my physical therapy. And then I had this really big aha. What if I redesign my paleo diet based on all the science I've learned from the ancestral health movement, from functional medicine, from my own read of the basic science? It's a few more months of work. But then in December, I begin this new way of eating. And in January, I can tell I'm a little bit stronger. My physical therapist says, yes, you are stronger. He advances my exercises. And then I begin walking with my 2 walking sticks and then without. And then for the first time in 6 years, with my son, Zach, jogging alongside on the left, my daughter on the right, and Jackie behind, I get on my bike and I bike around the block. My big 16-year-old son is crying. My 13-year-old daughter is crying. My wife is crying, and so am I. And 6 months after that, I do an 18.5-mile bike ride with my family. Once again, we're all crying. This changes how we think about disease and health. It will change the way I practice medicine, and it will ultimately change the direction of the research that I do. And now I'll come back to you, Alex, so we can get on with our interview.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable, Dr. Wahls. And I was on your website this morning, and one thing that I did just want to raise, because it did sort of genuinely touch me, as you mentioned in that video, that journey really started with you wanting to model resiliency for your children.
Oh, yeah. You know, I had thought, because I was an athlete before becoming a physician. I did wilderness travel. I competed nationally in full contact free sparring. So I was a real kick 'em up sort of girl. And I thought I'd teach my kids resilience through athletics, wilderness travel. And they were very young when I lost the ability to run, when walking became difficult. And I was having to think deeply about what it meant to be a parent and what was it that I needed to teach my kids in order for them to be successful adults, emotionally successful, financially successful. And it was, I think the core message is that life's not fair. Terrible things will happen to you. Very difficult circumstances will come your way, but you can still thrive. You can still move forward. And so that was sort of my mantra as things were getting difficult. It's like, your kids are watching. Zach and Sarah are watching. They're going to take in whatever decisions I'm making. And if I give in to the depression and despair that I did feel, they would give in to that when they face their hard times. So I was determined, like, okay, I'm going to keep staying positive and keep doing what I can.
Beautiful. And I guess that mindset is just so key ultimately within this process, because it was a long time for you.
It was a very long time. And as that story unfolds, people might think that I knew I was going to recover. What I want to stress to everyone is I was doing all of that I was doing to slow my decline, because at that time, the current understanding of secondary progressive MS is that it's relentlessly downhill, and people take, very expensive, very toxic drugs in an effort to slow the decline. There is no discussion. I never had my neurologist say, yeah, you're going to get better. They just said, we're going to do all this to try and let you continue to use your hands for a bit longer, to slow the risk of cognitive decline for a bit longer. So it was really quite interesting. So I'm remarkably better. I can sit up again for the first time. I can walk with 2 walking sticks again. I can walk without any walking sticks around the hospital and even around the block. But I didn't know what any of that meant. I really didn't know what it meant. And it's a common thing is people with progressive neurologic disorders is we finally get to a point where we let go of the future and just take each day as it unfolds. So, I was clearly better function in so many ways, but I didn't know because I let go of the future. I didn't know if that was going to stay or not. It wasn't until I rode my bike that I'm like, well, how much recovery might be possible? And it was such a remarkable moment for my son, my daughter, my wife, me, to realize I am getting better. And who knows how much recovery is possible, and that the current understanding of multiple sclerosis is incomplete.
Yeah. And you've mentioned there like the general prognosis and the conventional treatment. So I'm curious, like how did your colleagues, how did people initially respond to what you were doing?
So people were stunned to see me up walking around again, and they're very excited and they're thrilled. And then I changed how I'm practicing medicine. I'm focusing more and more on diet and lifestyle. And I began doing these little talks in the community to local churches, mosques, organic grocers. The local MS chapter asks if I would come talk to them. I say, of course. I get interviewed by the clinical advisory group, who's horrified by my message. And I explained that I'm going to tell my story and what I did. And they were afraid that that message would cause people to reject conventional medicine and reject treatment. So I'm banned as a speaker. I'm called in to my chief of staff's office, who says, okay, Terry, explain. I hear you're banned as a speaker. My people are coming in complaining about what you're doing in clinic, that you're not doing the standard of care. Now, fortunately, I had been mentally prepared for this. So I had brought with me a handful of scientific papers explaining why I was behind some of the supplements I was using. And John says, well, yeah, you may have scientific rationale, but you have to do the standard of care. So, I sat back, I said, of course, if you send an email out to all of the internal medicine faculty at the university that we have to follow just the standard of care, we can't use the latest science to guide our treatments, of course I would follow that. And I sit back and smile. And there's a long pause of silence between the two of us. And then finally, John says, okay, but if anyone gets hurt, you'll go through peer review. I said, of course, John, of course. And ultimately, though, I was having such great success in primary care in the traumatic brain injury clinic that John becomes a huge champion, supports my, and the chief of medicine at the university become huge champions. They support writing a case report, then a case series, and then we do a single arm feasibility study. And so, and I also say along the way, John, and I think it was very wise, and so I'm actually profoundly grateful. He said, Terry, you can't be upsetting your colleagues this way. So you have to learn how to talk about it, what you're doing in a way that is compatible with the standard of care. So I'm going to send you over to work with the chief of the complementary alternative medicine clinic at the university. And that really was quite helpful. So I could be careful about how I was talking about this in the public setting, and careful about how I was talking about this in my clinical notes. And that did create more comfort with folks.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and the key message is I shifted to making it very clear that my colleagues are treating disease. I'm working on creating health.
Okay.
And that nuance, and then talking about, I'm supporting physiology, supporting better nutrition, reducing stress, exercise, and putting things in that context, that is not threatening to my conventional folks who want to do FDA-approved treatments for symptoms and conditions. And then ultimately, my chief of medicine at the VA, the hospital where I was at, and the chief of staff would ask me to create my own clinic, which we'd call the Therapeutic Lifestyle Clinic. And we ran that for several years.
Fantastic. And I mean, that's taking you into some sort of clinical research as well.
Yes.
So you happy to maybe expand on some of what you found there as well?
Sure. So the very first study that we did, it was really quite interesting. My chair of medicine at the university said, what you achieved is so remarkable, Terry. We should really do a safety and feasibility study with others with progressive MS, and we could do secondary and primary progressive. Could they do this complicated regimen that you did? Do you hurt anyone along the way? And what's the effect size? So we enrolled and got 19 people, 2 men, otherwise women, to complete the diet that I used, supplements that I used, meditation, exercise, electrical stimulation of muscles. So it's a lot. I mean, it is a huge amount of stuff we're asking them to do when you have progressive MS and you're exhausted, and folks are really between cane and walkers. So they have significant disability. So we're able to show that the biggest side effect was if you're overweight, you lost weight without being hungry. And you lost weight very rapidly, get back to your weight that you were at in your early 20s. And I had to do safety reports every 3 months because people lost so much weight so rapidly. And then the other things that we were able to show is people did change their diet and sustain the dietary change. They did meditate, they did exercise, they did do the E-stim to extraordinary levels of adherence. That's remarkable. So we could show that, yes, they could do it. And then what happened when they did? Fatigue went down on a 7-point scale by 2.38 points. And the clinically significant difference is 0.45. So that's a big change. The quality of life, general health, and energy, as measured by short form 36, went up 14 to 17 points. And the clinically significant difference for quality of life is 5 points. So that is huge. Anxiety, depression scales went significantly down. Verbal reasoning, nonverbal reasoning. So our language skills and our spatial skills improved. And so that's really quite remarkable, because you would expect a 10 to 20% decline per year in the setting of progressive MS. So if all we had done was held people stable, that would have been like a home run, because people take these very toxic drugs in an effort to try and have stability in their disease. So as a group, their walking was stable, but we had half of our folks have clinically meaningful improvement in their walking function. Quite truly quite remarkable.
Yeah, it is remarkable, and I think that's just such testament to the healing capacity of the human body when the environment and the input is a
Correct.
good.
And I try to explain to my patients and the public when I'm teaching is that we have these beautiful, beautiful maps of biochemistry that are complicated, complex, with checks and balances and self-correcting. And that's what allows us to live. But if we didn't have all those checks and balances, the chemistry of life would not exist. We would not grow. We would not be able to reproduce. That complexity means that a drug-based solution for any problem is unlikely because of all those checks and balances. What would be more effective is gently nudging the system in as many ways as you can sustain. And so clinically, we discuss this, and then I have a conversation with you, Alex, if you're my patient, say, okay, so where can we start? What is the simple next step that you could take, that you're ready to take, willing to take? And I'll also note that if you can do this as a family unit, you'll be much more successful. And so some folks are miserable enough, they're like, okay, I'm going to be all in. Give me the whole program. I'm ready to do all of it. And others have to take a more measured step-by-step approach.
Okay, brilliant. I like that. So that multiple inputs that you're just nudging in the right direction, being a much more positive and powerful way to shift physiology.
Yeah, in general, humans find it easier to add than subtract. So I'd like to first work on the adds.
Yeah.
That the person's okay, willing to do. And it might be that we start with stress reducing practices. It might be that we start with adding more vegetables. And of course, I'm big into vegetables, so that's my favorite thing to have people start. And many people start there, but some, that's too hard because there's such a deep cultural identity, family identity with food and what we're eating, that for some folks, exercise is a better place for them, or stress reduction is a better place for them. And when I was younger and my hair was still brown, I was very emphatic that you got to start with food. Now I've seen a lot of success that people really need to decide where their starting point is.
Yeah.
And then inviting them to come back when you're ready for the next step. When you're ready for the next step, we'll keep working on this journey. And then people can decide how rapidly they want to go, how far they want to go. And I remind people that I am still, and hopefully I'll be doing this for another 60 years, tinkering with my self-care routine. And what are the things that I am adding? And I presume that I'm going to keep learning deeply keep adding and tinkering and making forward progress with, having ever more health, energy, vitality, and healthier aging.
Yeah. And I would love to dive into kind of your protocol a little bit more if you're happy to. But before
Sure.
we do, you touched on something earlier, which I would love for you to expand on, if you're happy to, which was you commented on how, physiology ultimately is very complex and one drug influencing one pathway, one receptor isn't likely going to be the way forwards. Are you happy to sort of take this concept and bring it into sort of research? Because nutrition research, nutrition studies are quite different to potentially from a drug perspective.
So for a long time, the nutrition studies were would they extract a particular nutrient or molecule and use, and basically it was a drug study. And most of the vitamin single molecule studies fall flat on their face. They just are not that helpful. Then finally, we got into doing dietary pattern studies. They're challenging. So the challenges there is, one, you got to convince people to stop eating the foods that they love and start eating foods that they don't know how to make or may have different taste. And they got to convince their family to do that. And then when you get people willing to be in a dietary pattern intervention study, if they're in the control group, they're going to read what the instructions were for the intervention group, and they'll begin changing their diet as well. So it's very hard to have a real control, because the control group isn't like the average person who's not in a dietary intervention study. But that's how it is, and that's some of the challenges that we have. I keep writing grants to do more dietary pattern studies, and we've done several. But I also work with our donors to keep doing what I believe in, which is diet and lifestyle in some small pilot studies. So we're sending off another grant for progressive MS, which is diet and lifestyle. And hopefully the NIH will fund us this time. But if not, I've got a donor that I'm having a conversation with who will fund the study if the NIH doesn't come through. And I'm in a really unique position because I have grateful patients whose lives we've had a phenomenal impact on, who then come in and say, Dr. Wahls, I still believe in what you are doing. How could we help your research? And so that allows me to do some very interesting, innovative studies.
Absolutely. Interesting. And am I right in saying you have a study happening at the moment on sort of quality of life in progressive MS?
Yeah. Well, so the study that we have, efficacy of diet on quality of life, it's in relapsing remitting MS. And we're comparing a ketogenic diet, a paleo diet, and a usual diet. The usual diet arm will get tips, cooking videos, recipes, and there's a dietary guidelines app that they can use to hopefully reduce their sugar, processed foods, and eat more of these radical things known as vegetables. The ketogenic arm will be checking their blood ketones with a finger stick a couple times a week. The paleo diet will be using the same diet that I've studied now for nearly a decade. And so it's a paleo diet. And we're going to have MRIs at the beginning and at 24 months. So that's very exciting. We follow people for 2 years. So that's very exciting that we get to follow them for so long. We'll be monitoring quality of life, fatigue, mood, and walking function, hand function, and visual function. This will be one of the largest, longest dietary studies that's been done. So we're very excited. I do not know which diet will be the best. And it's also quite possible that if the people in the usual care arm actually follow the suggestions that they get every month in terms of how they could improve their diet, that they may do just as well as the 2 intervention arms. So the key requirements are relapse remitting MS, and that you get to Iowa City, which is in the middle of the United States, at month 0, month 3, and month 24. Otherwise, anyone can come be part of that study.
Okay, brilliant. And yeah, I was really going to stress that point actually around the length of time of the study. I'm sure it's an MS paper that I read once looking at the ketogenic diet and the microbiome and seeing that at something like the 12-week mark, microbiome diversity significantly dropped, but at the 6-month mark, it actually returns to baseline levels. And one of the key messages there was, we have to be considering length of time for some of these dietary studies.
We have to consider the length of time for its impact on the microbiome, on metabolites, on brain structure, on quality of life. And then can people keep it up long term? What my dietary researcher colleagues tell me is that if the diet reduces symptoms acutely, you can get people to adopt the diet and keep it going, at least initially, but they will drift back to their usual diet because of the cultural, ethnic, family roots to that diet, unless symptoms flare again when you abandon the dietary intervention. In my first study, which we followed people for a year, and then 2 more years of long-term follow-up, what we observed is a stunning change, 1.5 servings of vegetables a day to 8 servings on average per day, that was sustained for that whole 12 months. And what people told us is, pretty quickly my fatigue reduced, my energy improved, and if I had a cheat meal, I felt terrible for the next 3 days. And so that really reinforces because staying on the diet. That's why I think 2-year studies are so important. Do people feel better on the diet so they can get started, they'll stay on it. And for them to maintain success on the diet, they do much better if we get a negative consequence for falling away from the diet. If there's no negative consequence, you gradually drift back to your previous diet.
Okay, fantastic. So with that in mind, is there anything else that you're just happy to kind of highlight in regards to sort of your protocol, some of these recommendations? You mentioned obviously adding more vegetables. Are there any other sort of big highlights from an adding, subtracting sort of perspective that you're happy to cover?
So if you are a vegetarian or a vegan, be sure you're getting sufficient protein. I worry about that. Myelin is a fatty substance. So we need plenty of, actually, a healthy amount of cholesterol, plenty of the essential fats that we can't manufacture. That's omega-3 fat, as in cold water fish, and omega-6 fat, as in nuts and seeds. Those are critical nutrients. Our sugars of processed foods have a lot of emulsifier, disrupt our microbiome. The emulsifiers in processed food disrupt our microbiome. And if you have a disrupted microbiome, you're more likely to have activated microglia in the head and more likely to have continued activity of the relapses. Whether or not you're having overt relapses, you're probably having at least hidden relapses, enhancing lesions in your brain. So it's just so important to get rid of the added sugar processed foods. The debate about gluten and dairy, continues to be controversial. There's certainly, for some people, gluten and dairy will be a big issue, and it's worth taking it out. But I don't. The research does not back up saying it's there for everyone. But as part of our protocol, the 2 intervention groups are not eating grain. The usual care group can eat grain. They certainly could continue gluten and dairy if they so choose.
Okay.
Or they could remove it if they so choose, because it's the usual diet that they're following.
Sure. Okay. And I guess as we're likely going to have people tuning in and listening to this conversation that have been diagnosed with MS, I wonder if it could be really helpful for you to expand even more on the differences that they might experience between a conventional medicine practitioner,
Oh, yeah, of course,
and
of
also
course.
kind of what you would do if they were seeing you.
So your neurologist would tell you that you have a progressive disease, the risk of disability is great, and so we want to stop that or slow that down. So we're going to give you a drug to suppress your immune system so they can't attack you. There's about 20, maybe 25 drugs that are available here in the US. I'm not sure about what's available in the UK, but probably about that. And depending on the severity of the disability that developed with your acute diagnosis and the number of lesions in the MRI, they will tell you you should be on a really highly potent drug that has more side effects, more risks, or your disease isn't too bad, so you could be on a lower potency drug that has fewer side effects. That's their conversation. They don't have any training really on diet, meditation, exercise, finding the inner purpose, behavior change. If you're lucky, they might have a little bit of training. They also don't have much time to talk to you about that because they have to talk to you about the disease modifying drugs. If you come to see me, I will tell you that, okay, work with your conventional doc on your decision about taking drugs or not taking drugs. And I will agree with them that if you have a big lesion load, severe disability, that taking drugs makes a lot of sense. Whatever you decide about drugs, let's optimize the environment. So I'm going to want to get basic labs, homocysteine, vitamin D, lipids, and then I'll ask if you're interested, and I'll encourage you to also get hormone levels, estrogen, testosterone, prolactin, thyroid antibodies. So we understand that. I'll want to know your fasting insulin, your hemoglobin A1C. And I'll ask you a lot about your poop. Are you pooping rocks that are hard to get out? Logs that are hard to get out? Logs that are easy to get out? Snakes? Pudding? Or tea? And people are sort of taken aback, but they all know what I'm talking about. Some functional medicine docs will go, the Bristol stool chart, whip that out. I'd rather talk about rocks to tea, and people understand that really quite well.
Yeah.
And then we have conversations about their previous dietary patterns, what they're eating now, their stress-reducing practices, their movement practices. I want to know the circumstances of their birth. I want to know periods of loneliness and despair, whether there was severe early life stress, what kind of psychological stress, physical stress have they endured growing up and currently, what kind of toxins they've been exposed to growing up and currently. And then I sort of map out their gut symptoms, their infectious symptoms, their symptoms suggesting poor mitochondria, and really that's heart, brain, eye problems, and overall energy levels. Then we talk about hormone symptoms and structural symptoms. So I map all of that out, and I'll take, so I have my assistant start gathering the information. So it's probably 3 to 4 hours of reviewing all that information. Then I'm meeting with the patient again after we've collected all of that to map out, okay, here are the network problems that I see. And here are the highest impact areas that we could work on. And then I turn to my patient. Okay, now let's together identify where you'd like to focus and what it is that you're going to do. And then my health coach is going to work with that person every week, touch points for a couple months to make sure they're making progress. And we'll periodically check back in, follow up on labs that, that indicated a problem physiology that we're correcting. And really what we're doing is, looking at that map of biochemistry, and I'm not doing $20,000 worth of measurement of the biochemistry, but I'm getting a sense of that from this very detailed intake that we do. And we are supporting the behavioral aspects that can create a better environment, step by step. And but I will say, if you're in my clinical trials, we're going to get you on the intervention diet relatively quickly. If you're in my clinical practice, we do things more slowly.
Okay.
But if you're in my clinical trial, I would warn people ahead of time, like, okay, it's not that we expect you to do it overnight, but we will expect you to get there within a couple of weeks.
Right. Okay. That's really helpful. Thank you, Dr. Wahls. And you mentioned sort of the conventional routes with sort of the conventional meds that are available. I think I'm right in saying there are some new drugs for MS in development around remyelination.
Oh, yeah, that is really, really exciting. There are very exciting drugs that work very, very well in mice and rats. And unfortunately, when we develop them or test them in humans, they either don't work or have only a tiny effect.
Sure.
And this is sort of like the drugs for Alzheimer's. They work very, very well. We have dozens of drugs that work very well for demented mice and demented rats, and either don't work at all in humans or they make things worse. We have 2 drugs that have little, tiny effects. But Alzheimer's is a terrible disease, so we're people are happy to have a little bit of effect. My sense of why we're seeing this, has to do with the fact that when you do mouse experiments, you're really controlling the whole environment for the mouse. You control their diet, their sleep, wake cycle, their level of stress. Everything is absolutely uniform. Well, if we're going to be that uniform for people, we'd have to imprison them, give them prison food, and give us, a very highly defined day-night cycle. That's never going to happen. So my take is you'll have to address the entire environment. And if you address the entire environment and you use some of these drugs that have a little effect, you might actually get a much, much larger effect. So we're working on a remyelination course that I plan on running for the first time this November. So your listeners should all sign up for my newsletter so they can get the announcement for the course when that goes out.
Fantastic. Which actually brings up a question that perhaps I should have started with, Dr. Wahls, which is, are you happy just to break down the mechanisms when we talk about remyelination, demyelination? What's going on in MS, just for people that are curious?
Oh, sure. Well, this is interesting. The current thinking is we have genes that make us vulnerable to an autoimmune disease, and the vast majority of people have and there are 200 to 300 genes in MS that have been identified. The vast majority of folks with any one of those genes don't get MS because each gene might increase my risk 1 to 2%. So there's some combination of genes plus an infection of some type. And there are 16 microbes that we've clearly identified increase the risk. So step 1 is the gene, step 2 is the infection. And then conventional science says there's a lot of environmental factors that then lead to MS. We don't quite understand them. Some of those factors that we're slowly figuring out are tobacco use, air pollution, low vitamin D, childhood obesity. Conventional medicine agrees on all of that. Functional medicine says, well, we also know the microbiome, stress reduction, loneliness, isolation, poor exercise, inadequate diet, leaky gut leads to leaky brain, oxidative stress, more toxins. If your estrogen is too low, or your thyroid is too low, or your testosterone is too low, that accelerates disease. So our approach is all of these environmental factors are accelerants to the autoimmune process. So we're going to address all of these accelerants and lower disease activity. What can I get people completely normal? Well, sometimes yes. Sometimes what we get is we slow down the decline and stabilize the person. Most often we're able to significantly improve quality of life, mood, mental clarity. And if the person's willing to do intensive physical therapy, and not everyone is for a variety of reasons, but if they're willing to do the intensive physical therapy, we can generally improve function. I do not have serial MRIs on anyone other than me to tell you what's happening at the brain level. What is really quite interesting, and my neurologist was so disappointed. You know, I come in, walk, you hadn't seen me walking, you know, in years. And so he's like, oh my God, we got to get MRI, see what's going on. And nothing changed. So he goes, well, you know, the MRI really doesn't tell a story. Those were old lesions. They haven't changed in a couple of years. So it was foolish to think that they were going to change, but clearly you have rewired around them. Yeah, and there's more recognition that the brain is very, very plastic, capable of repair. And so by creating health, I am helping the brain extend more neurons, create more connections between brain cells, more connections down that spinal cord out to what needs to be refreshed. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited in our upcoming study is that we'll be able to measure what's going on in the brain with a research grade MRI that has a magnet that's 3 times as powerful as the clinical magnets that people use. So we get a much more detailed look at the brain. We'll be able to see brain volume. We'll be able to see either enhancing lesions without needing to use gadolinium. So that's pretty exciting. And one of my hypotheses for a secondary aim is that by improving the diet, we can get people to the rate of brain volume loss that is seen with healthy aging. Because the rate of brain volume loss with MS is 3 times worse than healthy aging. So that's one of the measures that I'll be very, very excited for us to look at.
Yeah, that is incredible to be able to have that level of detail as well. And what you say around from your scans, that at least at the level it was scanning the brain, it was more related to the brain rewiring and this
Rewiring, correct.
element.
Although I should also add that you know, the deeper the lesions are, and if they're in the spinal cord, excuse me, it is much harder for the brain to repair the lesion. So again, the deeper it is within the brain or in the spinal cord, it's much harder for the brain to repair that lesion.
Okay.
Now, having said that, when I was in for my most recent MRI, my neurologist showed it to me, says, you know, your lesions in your cervical cord are finally disappearing. So that was pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So it takes a while, and I want to reassure everyone that yes, the MRI can be helpful to tell you that there's some hidden burdens that you don't know about, but it's function that matters. Can you use your hands? Can you feed yourself? Can you stand up from the toilet? Can you walk around? Are you able to still jog? Can you still walk in the neighborhood? So focus on getting your function back. And if your MRI still shows lesions, but your function is improving, my neurologist and I think the neurology community here at I would say, function trumps the MRI. If you have a lot of lesions, it may be a reason, yes, to keep doing DMTs, but it's far, far more important. Can you use your hands? Can you walk? Can you get up off the toilet okay? And that's what I stress to my patients. And if people have difficulty in any of those capacities, then we work and devise a rehab program to address those.
Okay, brilliant. Dr. Wahls, before we start to finish off, is there anything that you would like to add to today's conversation that we haven't touched on yet?
Well, I think the key message is that if I can come back from such profound disability, I could not sit up. I had increasingly severe trigeminal neuralgia. I was beginning to have brain fog. And a year later, I'm doing an 18.5-mile bike ride, and I'm writing research papers. And my energy, was good and continues to improve. And if some people will say, I clearly never had MS because you can't recover from secondary progressive MS. And so I can say, okay, maybe the university and the MS centers that I've gone to are all wrong. Then you have to explain away all of my clinical trials. And we've done 7 so far, all with favorable results. We've published this in scientific peer review publications. We've had 20 MS-related peer review publications. So there's reason to have hope. We have helped many, and that we have 80% response rate. That people who are trying our interventions, 80% have improvement. It's not 100%. In my clinics, when I get to see you and I get to do more extensive testing, deeper personalization, I can move that needle higher. If we look at the very best drugs for MS, they have a 68% reduction in the number of lesions and the relapse rate compared to controls. Even the best drugs are not at 80%. Even the best drugs don't turn off the disease entirely. Even the best drugs don't stop the march to a wheelchair. They delay it. Lifestyle should be part of what all of us are doing. It is, in my estimation, more powerful than the drugs because we can get an 80% response rate. They get a 68% response rate. And for some people, you have to do both. And for some people, you can, be on your drugs, start diet and lifestyle, stabilize your disease, and move to less toxic drugs, and then finally no drugs.
Brilliant. And I want to add to that just to finish, because you're not only giving hope to people with MS, but I would say because of the nature of MS, the prognosis, you're giving hope to everyone
Yes.
with chronic health issues, because if you can do this with MS, then you can do this with so many other conditions.
Well, in my clinical trials, or my private clinic, in the clinics I had at the hospital, we saw people with lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, a wide variety of autoimmune diseases. And, they all came in with fatigue, pain, brain fog as the most disabling symptom, and then the symptoms of their disease. And we use this type of program. And people consistently had more energy, less pain, better moods, and less brain fog.
Amazing. Excellent. Well, it's just wonderful to hear. And I'm grateful, Dr. Wahls, for you to come on and share your story and your research with our listeners. There are going to be people that want to learn more about you, potentially work with you. So where can people contact you and find you?
Yeah, so find us at Terry Wahls, that's Terry, Wahls, Wahls, remyelination.com. And if people want to have a one-page handout of the diet that we use, you can do terrywahls.com/diet.
Perfect. And you mentioned obviously your newsletter and the course you've got coming out in November. So I'm assuming people can sign up via your website as well if they want to stay updated with that.
Yeah, you for sure want to sign up for our newsletter because we haven't put the Remyelination course on our website yet. But the dates will be November 11 and 12, and it'll be 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Central Time. So it'll be a little later for you guys, but I think manageable. So
yes.
we tried to have it at a time of day that would work for our European friends.
Amazing. Thank you. Dr. Wahls, it's been such an honor. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm really looking forward to sharing this with our community. So thank you.
Thank you so much.